All right, so glad you're with us today. This isn't just another webinar you clicked on to pass the time. It's a crucial conversation that impacts all of us. That's right. Today we're tackling the ever important topic of sexual harassment in the workplace. So you're probably wondering who's behind the microphone. Well, I'm wearing two hats today. My name is Renee Morrison, and I serve as the chair of the PSOJ's Gender and Disabilities Affairs Committee. And I'm also your master of ceremonies. So I promise to keep things moving, engaging, and most of all, impactful. First things first, let's give a virtual round of applause to our incredible panel of industry experts. And a special shout out to Gavin Goff, who will be steering the ship as our moderator for the panel discussion. Thank you all for lending us your time and expertise, and we can't wait to hear your insights. So what brings us here today? In 2019, our committee took its first steps, and our goal was straightforward, but oh so crucial. Make our workplaces as inclusive as possible. A critical part of our work as a committee was the submission of our proposed changes to the Sexual Harassment Act, offering recommendations to enhance the efficacy of the legislation. So fast forward to today, and here we are, still pushing to change and still pushing for that change, and now talking about the brand new Sexual Harassment Act. The PSOJ acknowledges the significance and comprehensive training programs to raise awareness about sexual harassment, its prevention, and of course, the reporting procedures. So the act is more than just a legal shield, it's a cultural shift. So we want to go way beyond the black and white of legal text and talk about how this change impacts each and every one of us every single day. So you might be asking, why is this so important to the PSOJ and why should it be important to me? Good question. In fact, a great question. Having an inclusive and respectful workplace isn't just the right thing to do. It's smart business and it builds stronger community. So today we will open the floor for you to ask questions and share your experiences because change starts with meaningful conversations. So let's seize this opportunity to learn from each other and create workplaces that we can all be proud of. Now let's get into the meat of the matter. We have a well-structured agenda to guide us through this necessary conversation, starting with a short video presentation, followed by a panel discussion, and of course, our closing remarks. So now I invite you to all direct your attention to the screen as we watch a brief video on sexual harassment.
Hello there.
Stan, hey, thanks for coming by.
Sure.
Can I get you a coffee or anything?
No, thanks, I'm fine.
Oh, okay. Hey, have a seat,
Thanks.
please. I really appreciate this. And I could have come to your branch instead.
No, this worked out fine. I had a meeting in the area. So, how's the family, Ralph?
Oh, great. Sally just started first grade.
Is that right? Oh, that's wonderful. My youngest just graduated from college
Oh, my
last
goodness.
year, so it goes by fast.
Oh, yes, it does. Yes, it does.
So, what can I do for you?
Well, I didn't want to get into it over the phone, but I've had some personnel issues, and I wanted to talk to you because you're always so helpful to me.
What's the problem?
Well, a few weeks ago, one of our sales assistants filed sexual harassment charges against one of our FCs. It's been a real headache.
What happened?
Well, it's kind of complicated. It all began a few months ago with one of his clients.
Mr. Sprouse, Tom will be right out. Can I get you anything?
That's okay. I'll just wait here and admire the scenery.
Bert, thanks for coming down. How you been?
Can't complain, Tom. See if I can get yourself a new girl.
That's right. Wendy came aboard last month.
Well, she's in the right business because she certainly has some fine assets.
Excuse me, Tom, do you have a moment?
Yeah?
I wanted to talk to you about Mr. Sprouse. I mean, the way he talked about me.
Oh, well, don't worry about Bert. He's harmless. Hello? Hey, Phil. Can you hold on just one sec? Wendy, I gotta take this call.
Tom, what he said really insulted me.
Look, Wendy, he's got a $2 million account with us, so just ignore him, okay? Hey, Phil. Yeah, I got the order.
June, I mean, I don't even...
I think Wendy would have let this incident pass if there hadn't been other problems between her and Tom.
This is the last one.
Yep, that's it. Nice. All right, excellent work.
Thanks. No problem.
You feel like getting something to eat?
No, thanks. I gotta get back home.
Oh, come on. After all this hard work, the least you can do is let me buy you some dinner.
Really, I have to get back. Maybe some other time.
Sure, sure. You know, Wendy, you've really been doing a great job.
Thanks, Tom.
It's funny, since you've been here, I feel better about myself. I've not had a lot to feel good about since my divorce.
I don't know what to say. I'm sorry about your divorce.
Well, you sure I can't interest you in some dinner?
Yeah, really, I have to get back. My boyfriend is expecting me.
Oh, I understand. Sure.
Well, good night.
Uh-huh.
A few days after that, Tom blew up at her.
Wendy,
Yes, what's the matter?
did you open the Greenberg account?
No, I had to...
What have you been doing? It's been 3 hours.
I thought I could...
Do me a favor, okay? Don't think. If there's something you don't understand, you come to me, you ask me. You got it?
Yes, but
No,
I've
no,
only
no
been
buts.
trying...
Just do what I tell you to do. All right?
Tom, I want to talk to you about what happened earlier.
Don't worry, I straightened it out with the client.
That's not what I meant. I'm very upset about the way you spoke to me. It was very embarrassing.
Wendy, you took all morning to open the account.
There were 2 other accounts to open, and all the computers were down.
Why didn't you tell me?
You didn't give me a chance.
Okay, maybe I overreacted a little, and I'm sorry. But, you know, Wendy, I think a lot of the problem here has to do with your attitude.
My attitude.
Yeah, I think you could be a little more positive about your job.
I think I've been very positive about my job. It's just hard to stay positive when you scream at me in front of everyone.
Wendy, do you want the job to work out, or don't you?
I've been trying to make the job work out. I just don't know what you want from me.
All I'm saying is, you could try to be a little friendlier. This is a people business.
I think that I've been very polite, and I've tried to be professional.
You've got to learn to relax. Look, maybe you and we got off on the wrong foot. Why don't we discuss it tonight over drinks?
You want to have drinks?
Yeah, we can talk about your future here.
What?
So did you have drinks with him?
Of course not.
Well, maybe he was just trying to bury the hatchet.
Ralph, he was touching me and telling me that my future here depended on my being friendlier. Isn't that obvious enough?
All right, let me talk to Tom. I want to hear his version.
His version?
I just want to make sure that you didn't misunderstand his intentions. Wendy, don't worry. I'm sure that we can straighten this out.
She said that?
Tom, these are serious allegations.
She's lying. That's not what this is about.
Well, what is this about?
She couldn't handle the pressure. She knew that I wanted to let her go, so she cooked up this harassment charge.
Whoa, you wanted me to fire her? Well, why am I only hearing about this now?
Hey, I wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. But after this, I want her gone. I mean today.
So what happened?
Well, right after that, Wendy filed a complaint with our Human Resources Department, and they came into the branch and conducted an investigation. She now works for someone else in the branch, and Tom got a written warning. What, you think I should have handled it differently?
I'm not sure. What would you do differently if you had to do it again?
Now that you're all more aware of the issue at hand, I'd like to pass the floor over to Amisha Brown, PSOJ's marketing and PR manager, who will introduce our esteemed moderator for today's panel.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you, Madam Chair. I have the distinct pleasure of introducing our very capable moderator this morning, who will, of course, be guiding a very important panel discussion on sexual harassment in the workplace. Gavin Goff is the head of litigation department at Myers, Fletcher and Gordon, where he has been practicing for 20 years. His practice is generally focused on employment law and public law. The labor practice group that he leads has been involved in several landmark court decisions related to unjustifiable dismissal in Jamaica. Gavin and his team regularly conducts workshops on sexual harassment, as well as the preparation and revision of sexual harassment policies and disciplinary policies. Please welcome Mr. Gavin Goff, well known to our virtual PSOJ podium.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much, Amisha, and thank you everyone for tuning into this PSOJ seminar on sexual harassment in the workplace. I really want to congratulate and recognize the PSOJ and all its committees, and especially the committee responsible for this particular seminar, for putting this together. You know, we have a very talented, knowledgeable group of panelists this morning. And I'm sure that we're going to have a vibrant and informative discussion about a very topical issue of sexual harassment in the workplace. As most people on this platform probably already know, the sexual harassment law, our first of that kind, has been passed some years ago and has now come into force in July of this year. And so, as with any other piece of new legislation, there's a lot to learn, there's a lot to discuss. And of course, there are obligations which we need to comply with. So this hopefully will be an informative session, and where you have access to some experts in the field to ask questions. I have some of my own, but certainly I know that we'll be taking at the appropriate time questions from the participants here. And we look forward to having an engaging discussion. So allow me to introduce our panel, our esteemed panel. We have Sharon Coburn Robinson, who is a Principal Director of Gender Affairs Bureau of the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport. We also have Loy Walters, who's the President of the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica, also known as HERMAJ. We have Kadria Folks, attorney at law and an employment law specialist practitioner, and she was a senior legal officer in the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. We have Belinda Williams, Assistant Vice President and Group Chief Marketing Officer for Proven Management Limited. And we have my friend Maya Wilson, who's a Director and Senior Legal Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Scotia Bank Limited. So I ask you all to help them feel welcome in whichever way you are permitted on Zoom. Welcome to all the panelists, and we're going to get straight into the discussion. So our sexual harassment law is coming to force. I think there's one member of the panel who was integral in the wording and crafting of the sexual harassment law, Ms. Kadria Folks. Do you mind if I start with you? Kadria, can you tell us where you are now? Because I know that you were at the Ministry of Labor at a critical point in time.
Yes, that's correct, Gavin. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone, for having me on this panel. So I'm a sole practitioner, and I also lecture at the University of the West Indies Faculty of Law. The course is Employment Law and Industrial Relations. So currently I'm at home, though.
Okay, awesome. All right, so when you were at the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, you were part of a team which was looking at the crafting of this law, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so we have you to blame, essentially. Or thank. Okay, awesome. All right. So the law wasn't ultimately passed under the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, though, right?
Yes, that's correct.
It moved to the Ministry of Gender,
Culture and
Culture,
entertainment
Gender, Entertainment, and Sport.
and
Okay,
sport.
put it in context. All right. So as a lawyer and as someone who was integral in the drafting of this legislation, can I ask you the first and basic question we always ask is, what is the definition of sexual harassment in this law, and is it changing in any way what we always, those of us who are aware of sexual harassment, is it changing in any respect what we understood sexual harassment to be all along?
All right, so sexual harassment has to do with any unwelcome advances of a sexual nature, which the person on the receiving end is offended by or humiliated by, or in the context of work, it creates a toxic work environment whereby, you're just uncomfortable about the situation that has been created. Now, a sexual advance can be physical, it can be verbal, it can be nonverbal. What has changed is our understanding as to what will be tolerated, because we are very overtly sexual people. And so some things that we used to tolerate before, based on the provisions under this legislation, those things are prescribed. For instance, we like to catcall persons. That's one aspect of a verbal sexual advance. And, sometimes we're just very too open and permissive in our workspaces, touching people or compliments that go too far. So under this new dispensation, we'll have to be more conscious of that and more conscious of the fact that it's not about your intention of just complimenting someone. You also have to consider how that person will receive your advances. Because if it's welcome, the same thing that is not a sexual harassment, if it's welcome, is sexual harassment if it is unwelcomed. So it has a lot to do with the person on the receiving end. So now more than ever, we have to be aware of person sensibilities.
Okay, thank you so much for that. I'm going to bounce it over now to Sharon. Again, Sharon is now with the Gender Bureau's Affairs of the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. And that's the ministry that now has responsibility for the coming into effect of the law. So question I have for you, Sharon, I mean, you heard what Kadria was speaking about in terms of different types and forms of sexual harassment. Can you take us a little further down that road in terms of what the different types of sexual harassment recognized under the law are?
Certainly. Thank you very much, Gavin. But before I take you there, I need to establish that the sexual harassment legislation,
yes,
in fact, started with an anti-sexual harassment policy that was developed in the Bureau of Gender Affairs with support from key stakeholders, including the Ministry of Labor and Social Security.
That is correct.
And you would have known too that there was an earlier iteration of this policy that made it through the lower house and was set for the upper house. And the election happened in 2016. And so that was, it paused for a while because the minister wanted to have it go in a particular direction. Now, we have not ever stopped working with the Ministry of Labor and Social Security, along with the Ministry of Justice and other entities, because of the fact that this harassment, this legislation is a workplace issue. It's also an issue that is very grievous, and so many persons would be a part of it. Now, you ask about the types of sexual harassment, and so I will tell you that there are two main types. The main type would be the one that most persons know. That's the one where there is an exchange that is expected to happen. Sometimes it's the person who is making that advance that expects this exchange to happen. And sometimes the person on the other end, as Kadra pointed out, is not in favor or doesn't agree with whatever the advance is. And this person would want to make an advance. It's called quid pro quo. That's the term that is used, but it really means this for that, or tit for tat really mean somebody's making an advance, a sexual advance. And it could be that they are trying to get something out of it. They want to make a pass at you as a sexual overture because of something that they have that they think you can fulfill. For example, they might find you attractive, or they want to have a relationship with you, but it just doesn't come across properly. So the way it has been done is not in your favor. You are not in agreement with it. You object to it. And if you object vehemently, sometimes the person, because this person thinks he or she, because it's gender neutral, so Gavin, it's gender neutral. And so it can be male to male, female to female, female to male. It covers all forms of harassment and all types, and it covers all persons. So if it is that this person is making an advance, and it must have, as the definition pointed out, something that has a sexual overture, or there's a sexual advance, or there is something that causes you to feel uncomfortable, you feel stripped, naked, bare. You know, there's so many expressions that persons have used about how they feel when a sexual advance is made to them. And you know that this is not just a friendly camaraderie. Somebody's not just saying something nice to you, complimenting you, but there is a motive. Somebody wants to achieve something for him or herself, and perhaps you're not participating in it. So that would be the first type. And that's the main type, where sometimes there's a promise of an advance, that's an advantage that you can get, a promotion on the job. Perhaps it is that somebody wants to tell you, if you do this, you will get this in advance. For example, tenant landlord, that is not so popular. A lot of times we don't talk about that. But there might be a case where a landlord decides that he's going to reduce the rent, subsidize the rent for the tenant. She has children, and he might know that she is single, so she doesn't have a support. And so he tells her he will give her financial support. And in exchange for that, he might want to have his way with the children. And so he ends up having an advance or making advances on the children, and the children might end up not liking it, not knowing how to say something, because sometimes the mother might not even want to hear about it based on the fact that she's getting something out of it. And it might come to the point where the older one who can actually get pregnant, if it is that he has gotten so far to make advances and it becomes sexual, it can become offensive where the child becomes pregnant and the younger one becomes molested. That's an example of sexual grooming. And so once it gets to that place, then something would have to happen so that the mother either makes a complaint about it. She doesn't have HR as in the workplace, so she would have to complain to the tribunal, or she can call the Bureau of Gender Affairs and lodge that complaint, and we would take it from there so that she can get redress. But that's just one form. The other type would be the poisoned, hostile, or toxic environment. So this person is in the workplace and is not necessarily the receiver of the action, but is really perturbed, discombobulated, uncomfortable because of what is happening around him or her. And this person might not necessarily speak out because of not being sure of how it will be received and what will the environment be like. But because it is toxic, it's affecting production, it's shutting down production, it's causing persons to feel uncomfortable. And of course, you know, Gavin, in a workspace, once you're going to threaten productivity, then that's an issue, and that's something you have to work on very quickly. So persons who are in toxic, hostile, intimidating environments are asked to speak up. Verbalize it, put it in writing, or speak to somebody so that they will know that this is an issue so that it can be addressed. Those are the two main types.
Okay, thanks for that, Sharon. You mentioned that, you know, the role of gender, the Gender Bureau has had an important role in this for a very long time. And some persons have commented that they're seeing only, you know, women on the panel. And the example you gave, of course, the victim was a woman.
Yes.
You mentioned that the law is gender neutral.
Yes.
So, but can you explain for our participants why the Ministry of Gender has such an active role, and what role does it have to play going forward now that the law has been passed?
Okay. Thank you so much for that question. So the Bureau of Gender Affairs in the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport would indeed have a vested role in the legislation based on the fact that our remit speaks to ensuring that our large program is gender mainstreaming, and that looks at making sure there is mainstreaming of gender in all policies, programs, projects, and anything that's operational. Now, in the course of gender mainstreaming, you might have what people consider as and what's defined as discrimination. You might have victimization, and you might have some forms of abuse. As we know it, the largest concern that persons will voice now, if you ask what is the largest concern, they'll tell you violence, and in some cases, gender-based violence. And so based on the fact that this is such a huge issue, the sexual harassment legislation would be of critical concern to the ministry, because we have a responsibility as a gender machinery to ensure that once somebody squeals discrimination, once there is an act of abuse, persons are uncomfortable, it's affecting persons' rights to be able to function properly. And this is a business webinar, so it would be making that business case to make sure that your workplace is safe, workers are able to be their most productive. We have that responsibility as a gender machinery within the ministry to ensure that legislation is in place to protect the rights of persons who might experience this form of abuse in the workplace. And it extends, that's the legislation, to other spaces outside of just workplaces. So if you are in an accommodation, and I mentioned landlord-tenant earlier, it also refers to schools and educational institutions and other spaces where persons are engaged in learning. It's recreational, it extends to recreational spaces, and pretty much covers the spaces that persons would have interactions where there might be a case of sexual harassment. So yes, the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment and Sport would have a vested interest in that, because we have a responsibility as a ministry to ensure that persons enjoy their rights and that the rights are protected, and that if there is a violation of that human right, that there is something in place that would allow persons to access redress and to know who to go to, what to do in order to get justice served. And that's because we have two, at this point outside of our legislation, there are two large oversight documents that we love to refer to a lot. The first one is a national policy for gender equality. And that's very important, Gavin, because that speaks to the raising the tray for gender mainstreaming. So it gives us the right to do what we do to ensure that all parties enjoy their rights on a basis of equality. And we throw equity in there as well to make sure that while you're getting equality and persons are having a level playing field, that you match what is required. So if it's a 50-50 that's required, we go for that. If it's a 70-30, we go for that. Another part of the National Policy for Gender Equality speaks to multi-sectoral approach and partnerships. And that's one of the reasons why we are so interested in partnering with the PSOJ on this webinar to ensure that the information gets out. So we are happy for this platform.
Thank you.
Third policy.
Oh,
sorry, can I just
Sure.
Can I just add one final one? That is the other one I want to speak about is very important because that's a participatory approach. And that looks at how can we ensure that all parties understand their importance in the dialogue that we have that allows us to be a part of the development process. And how can you, getting the information, use that information? And so sessions like these are very critical because once you get the information, you're now armed with information that you can use to assist yourself and to assist others. And then finally, the NSAP. This is a broad, comprehensive National Strategic Action Plan. And this plan is a 10-year plan. It's geared towards ensuring that all matters relating to gender-based violence are captured and folded in seamlessly in this ambitious 5 strategic priority area plan. I'll speak further about that when you ask another question. Thank you, Gavin.
Thank you, Sharon. I want to bring in some of our other panelists. I'm going to bring in Maya and I'm going to bring in Belinda as well. But before I do that, I want to just touch on one of the important aspects of the law, which is the requirement for all employers to have a sexual harassment policy. Now, before I bring in my other two panelists, I just want to ask Kadria one question. The law and the definition that is included in the law, how does that definition affect employers who would already have a sexual harassment policy in place, which might have a somewhat different definition? Are we allowed to have different definitions, or is this something that it's recommended that everybody adjust their policies to bring them in line word for word with the definition of sexual harassment in the law?
All right, thank you so much, Gavin. Well, absolutely. If the law is prescribing activity and you're trying to give effect to that by way of legislation, then the legislation has to be congruous with what the legislation, your policy has to be congruous with what the legislation provides for. So that's absolutely necessary. So you can't decide that certain activity based on my industry is, it's normal, it's accepted. No. If it is that you're going to implement this legislation, because remember, what the legislation provides for or requires of employers is a zero tolerance approach. And so it clearly sets out the behavior that is not acceptable, that is antisocial, that is sexual harassment. So it is that behavior and that standard by which you're going to be judged. There's another definition that's relevant based on your question, the definition of worker. Because typically when employers are responding in terms of labor policy, they limit their response to the employee. But here it is that we have this legislation that refers to worker, which is a broader concept than employee. So who is captured by that policy would have to include the persons that are in the employment relationship, but basically anybody who is doing work in reference to that workplace. So an independent contractor, a subcontractor, a student, who is doing work experience, an apprentice, a domestic worker. So who is
applicants too, somebody who's not even in the environment yet.
Exactly. So those definitions are going to be very relevant, because you would have missed the mark if it is that in your policy, you're going to say, oh, this policy only applies to employees in an employment relationship. You would have missed the mark.
Got you. All right. So I'm going to bring in Maya first. Maya, again, is the Senior Legal Counsel and Corporate Secretary of Scotiabank Limited. I know that Scotiabank probably would already had a sexual harassment policy, whether designed locally or adopting one which is in line with a global standard. So the question I have for you first, Maya, is this new law, how does it affect in financial institutions like Scotiabank, and in particular, institutions like Scotiabank, which have a global presence?
Thank you, Gavin. Thanks for that question. And thanks, PSOJ, for organizing this very important seminar. So I think, it's not limited to the banking or finance sector. It's going to affect and should rightly affect all industries, all organizations. And I think we all, as people who manage workplaces that employ people, whether they be, employees, contingent workers, etc., we have an opportunity and a responsibility to ensure that they are safe in the workplace. So it is very important and very key for us. I mean, at Scotiabank, as you said, we do already have a harassment policy. It's a global policy because we operate in a global environment, the way that Scotia is structured. And first thing we did when we saw the new act come out was make sure that our policy is aligned with the local legislation. And there is some work to do now to include some additional terms in our policy to make sure we cover for the sexual harassment tribunal, which wouldn't have been there before, which I think is a great tool and a great avenue if we can't resolve matters internally. So, I mean, the way we approach it, and I think Kedra used the term before, is a zero tolerance. Zero tolerance at Scotia. I think what's really important is to set the tone from the top and have the right structures and avenues in place so that our staff, our contingent workers, our interns, we even extend it as far as the third-party workers, people there on contractual services, or anybody that is a supplier, as well as customers. That's how broad our harassment policy is. It extends to everybody that we touch within the workplace. And we make sure there are avenues for them to bring complaints and at different levels. So if you're not comfortable at your immediate manager level, you can take it to the next level management. You can even take it out of country if you're not comfortable. And we also have something called a staff ombudsman, who doesn't sit in any department, doesn't report to anybody locally, but to somebody local in Jamaica that you can speak to about raising your issues if you're not comfortable to take it within your own department or within your own team. And so I think having really defined structures gives anybody that's within the Scotiabank workplace the comfort and the trust to know that there is somewhere that they can go to raise this concern without any fear of retaliation. And if there's one message that I think we need to get across today in the workplace, is that that is the most important thing, because we can't just have policies on paper and say, yes, we tick the box and have the policy. But what structures do we have in place to really enable these policies to be meaningful and to assist people when they really have issues?
Thank you so much for that enlightening answer. But you already have been doing sensitization sessions, even before this law came into place.
Oh, yes, yes.
How frequently do you have those?
How frequently? Every year. So we have a very robust training program. We have mandatory training, as well as you can do additional training voluntary if you want. But every year we do mandatory training. It includes a particular session on harassment, and it gives examples just similar to the video we just watched at the beginning of the session. It shows real life scenarios, and then, you know, asks the question, what would you do? What's the best way to approach this? And then reminds people of all the channels that you have to, you know, avenues you have to seek redress. In addition to that, we have something called a code of conduct that we all have to attest to. And the code of conduct has certain principles in there, including how to treat people fairly, including, you know, best practices in terms of conduct. And we have to read it and attest to it annually. And these things are mandatory. So, you know, if you don't do it, your name goes on a red list and you get called up to management to explain yourself. So it's just, you know, reinforcement and reminders, just so that we really live the culture that we really want to project. And it's not just, as I said, theoretical on paper.
Okay. Belinda, I want to bring you in. Thank you so much, Maya. Belinda, I want to bring you in at this stage. Are there any, Maya spoke about the ombudsman, and she spoke about you know, annual training and sensitization and certification. What other strategies does proven management employ to, you know, have a respectful workplace, with specific reference to prevention of sexual harassment?
Thank you so much. And just like many of the speakers before me, you would see that much of what is going to be said and done here is going to be iterative. The whole thing starts, as Maya rightly says, from the code of conduct, even before we would have actually implemented and started utilizing the policy framework. What we do have in place as well is that it starts from the onboarding, from the get-go, and from getting persons into the organization. You're going to employ persons that are going to come with certain skill sets, standards, ethics, and you're going to look for all the things that generally speaks to what makes a proven team member. Looking for the proven team member as well, you have to also look at how do they apply or relate with your overall core values. Do they exhibit, demonstrate? Can they also exhibit and demonstrate all of your core values? And for us, almost everyone will have a core value that speaks to teamwork and that will speak to respect.
Now, I want to interrupt you for just a second. You're speaking about onboarding. Does Proven do any of those? I think they call them psychometric.
Yes.
Tell me about that, please.
Well, I'm not in the talent management department. Okay. So here is the thing now. So you have me on here and I was saying, okay, looking at everybody's skill sets, and I'm like, okay, so I'm the brand person. So when it comes on to this whole Sexual Harassment Act and policy, when you think about it from a brand, it has reputational risk impact. Yes. And if a brand fails to protect its reputation and brand, then, you know, basically, Gavin, everyone, you all know what can happen to the organization at large. And it comes back down to performance. But when it comes down to how our talent management team handles the whole efficacy of that, there is a structure, there is a process. There is also an outsourcing because we don't have that inside. So we normally get persons outside who has that skill set, who keeps on reinventing and paying and nurturing just to build that skill set so that, you know, when they give us the information, it is as accurate as possible. Mind you, even with the best type of systems that you have there are things that you have to put in place for yourself to kind of judge this. As Maya said, the attestation that we have to do annually. And I mean, when you're in the financial services sector, those things are so robust and rigid that you don't have a say in terms of how you go about it, because it literally has implications for how you perform, how your team is viewed, and how your organization is viewed. So our talent management team handles all of that. They outsource, they refer. We also work with Hermage because we're a part of that structure as well. We also work with PSOJ, hence the reason why I'm here. And I'm also on the committee that is helping to formulate and to reinforce this whole aspect of how do we go forward as an organization, individually and collectively. But I can definitely say to you that the framework that is in place now is a stepping stone.
Yes.
Many of us would have had our code of conduct. If we look at what exists and reside there, we basically can and should be at this point really just putting in the nuts and bolts to make it even more applicable for how it is that it's going to conform to what is required in the new act.
Thank you so much, Belinda. I want to bring in Loy now. Again, she's the president of Hermage as a human resource management association of Jamaica. To help us more understand some of these best practices as it comes to reporting and preventing sexual harassment within the workplace. One of the questions which we have in our chat from Richard is, how does a business treat an employee who does not feel comfortable with submitting their complaint of sexual harassment in writing? So I'm going to ask you to bear that question in mind as you answer the more general question about best practices for preventing and reporting sexual harassment.
All right. Morning, Gavin. Thank you. Morning, everyone. Thanks for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. And it's nice to see some of you on. Well, in terms of best practices, I think one of the most important things for us to do in our workplaces is to establish monitoring and evaluation systems, Gavin, so that we look at our business processes, we look at our policies, our workplace policies, we look at our procedures. Because you see, if we don't start properly, we won't end properly. You know, when you do a monitoring and evaluation and you have a feedback loop, you know when something is off in terms of your policies. So it starts at the very beginning. What, you know, because some of our policies are written a certain way. They are written with biases. You know, we don't think that way, but we all have biases, right? And so we need, and it's very hard sometimes to be objective. We might, you know, as you know, I remember Sharon said persons can get hurt even with gender streaming if it's not done properly. So we have to do that. We have to take all complaints seriously. That is, you know, in Jamaica, as Ms. Folk said, we are very overtly, you know, we love to hug, we love to kiss on the cheek, we are very expressive, you know. But so we have to help our workplaces know how important that is. It's also important to have sensitization sessions yearly and to start from the very beginning. Somebody's coming in for the first time, the onboarding, make them aware. Use, you know, as Belinda just said, use places like Hermage. I'm going to push Hermage, right? So Hermage has in-depth training for sexual awareness and sexual harassment. You know, you want to train your business partners, you want to train the committee members, you want to train your supervisors, because sometimes persons are afraid, to go back to the question, they are afraid because of the toxic environment, the poisonous environment, the supervisor who is not listening to them, right, Ms. Folks? I know you know what I'm talking about, the supervisor who makes it very difficult for you. And so it's very important that we pay attention to that. Another best practice is to do employee satisfaction and engagement surveys. When you do that, you tend to pick up problems to see, are we otherwise or are we toxic? Or, you know, do we need to shift? Do we need to do a cultural shift? Because cultural shift is very hard. It's not easy to do. One of the things we can do we are in a new era now where people like to create content. People can create content, Gavin, and create a PR campaign. We can create our own videos with persons that look like us, you know, in the videos. You know, we can have these table talks, and we are having this panel here today. We can even have an internal radio series. So most of us have an intranet at work. We can develop a little radio series that plays through our intranet. so that people hear and understand the training. We can record sessions like this and have them played so that persons can listen to them. Those are some of the best practices. But we also need to ensure that we have things like the best systems, internal systems. So internal systems like, what do we have a proper disciplinary procedure? Do we have a proper grievance procedure? Persons don't want to come because they don't know who to come to. What happens if it's the CEO? Am I going to lose my job? You know, does the CEO report to a board? Who do I go to? What's the grievance steps? Do we have have we documented our internal complaints procedures? Or we just say, sure man, you know, as we saw in the video, if we were to put it in Jamaica, and sure man, I don't know, I just say stay because it's $2 million I'm bringing in. We can't touch him. $2 million US is a lot of money. That's how some people see it. We need to have proper internal system. We need to be very confidential. That is a long story that we hear over and over again. That people business gone a road, if we were to use a part, you know, it would say it in patois. But we need to make sure that our systems have that kind of thing. We need to protect people. You know, people are afraid to put it in writing, but unless you have something in writing, you can't move forward. So you have to encourage the person to bite the bullet, you know, to get there to say, yes, if it is that important, we need to do it. But one of the things too, Gavin, that I have in my research, I have found is that mediation helps. When you have a lot of mediation in the workplace, mediation training regularly, persons tend to know how to diffuse situations, you know. We don't want any unwanted advances in the workplace. And so it's something you have to work at. And use the glossary. Sharon had put a serious glossary in her document. Let us use the glossary so we all are using the same terms and we know what that means. Because if, you know, sometimes that's part of the problem. What does somebody call unwanted? What is unwanted? And what is harassment? Maybe we need to have something larger than a sexual harassment policy. Maybe we need to have a harassment policy, period. That we don't want any violence and bullying in the workplace. So it's not just a sexual thing, but it's larger. Those are my few words.
Thank you so much, Lawyer. I'm going to throw a general question out there to anyone who feels that they wish to take a stab at it. There is a policy document which is part of the schedule to the law. It's like a template which businesses can use to essentially start off their own policy creation. And in that document, it does suggest, it has spaces there for the employers to insert their own procedures for reporting sexual harassment. The question I have here is, do you feel, having seen the law, having seen that template, that your own reporting mechanisms within your organization, do you feel that they were inadequate and needed to be revised as a result? Or did you feel that the reporting mechanisms that you currently have in place were sufficient and compliant with the law?
So I'll jump in on that one, Gavin.
Sure.
So I think for us, we find that our reporting mechanisms are very sound. The structure we have is very detailed and tiered to give lots of opportunities for escalation, or if you don't feel comfortable at one tier, you jump to the next tier. And we don't have any restrictions. You could be on the front line of the business and take your issues out of country. You don't have to go to your supervisor if you're not comfortable. So I think, but there's always opportunities for, looking back at the policies, refreshing, bolstering. And I think there are definitely some things in the policy and within the schedule that we can use to look at our own harassment policy And as Lori said, we actually don't have a sexual harassment policy. We have a harassment policy, and it covers bullying and any other conduct that makes people feel uncomfortable in the workplace. So, you know, there are some things I think we could pull from to further strengthen the policy, but I do feel like the what we had on the procedures and the structures we have in place were quite sound.
Can you tell us if within your organization complaints of sexual harassment need to be made in writing? And the reason I ask that is that I know that your policy speaks about harassment in general, but there are some unique features of sexual harassment. There's a sensitivity there, which may not be present for other types of harassment. And because of that sensitivity, and because very often the complaint may not have any extrinsic proof, it may only be the complainant's.
It's how you feel, right?
Yeah,
it's how
complainant's word
the
against
person
someone.
receiving the unwanted conduct, how they feel. So
Right.
absolutely. So with
Sorry,
anything,
sorry, 1 second there. The question again was, is it required to be put in writing?
yes.
Okay.
So I think with anything, if you're going to advance an investigation and actually try to resolve an issue, there has to be some documentation. So where we will be more flexible is in very sensitive situations. If somebody doesn't want to pen the actual complaint, there are avenues where, say, the ombudsman or somebody else from our HR team could have the meeting with the person and really take down, for want of a better word, a statement.
Yes.
And then they could verify, yes, this is true, this is what I said, and they confirm, because sometimes it is difficult. So we really have to be broad in the ways in which we take these matters further, because we can't just decide, okay, well, if you didn't put it in writing and send me an email, then it's not going to go anywhere. I think that's very short-sighted. We have to be conscious of the fact that these things can be very sensitive. And so there are ways and means that we can still, you know, document these things properly so that a proper investigative process takes place. Because don't forget, there's still somebody on the other side that has their side of the story. So we have to be fair to both sides. So we do need it in writing, but we're not so stringent to say, well, you must fill it out on this form, and this is the only way it's going to happen. Otherwise, you know,
we have to find other ways to
have
support.
to find other ways and be conscious of all the issues and sensitivities.
Thanks so much, Maya. Kadria, I see your hand up. I was actually coming to you just a while ago. I'm going to ask you a question, and you can give me your comment before you answer my question if you choose. Earlier, I think you spoke about the unwanted compliments, and I think it was Loy, or maybe it was Sharon, speaking about people's motives and intentions. But when I read the law, it seemed to me as if the intention of the person who was making the sexual advance was not so relevant as the way that that sexual advance was received and interpreted by the person to whom it was directed. Is that a statement which you think is correct? Do you agree? Do you disagree? And if you could just give us your general view on the hurdles that someone might face where they have a kind of an unsupported complaint, as in a complaint which doesn't have any kind of extrinsic evidence to support it.
All right, that's quite a detailed question, Gavin.
Okay, you can only answer the part you feel comfortable with. We have a full panel of experts here.
All right, so in terms of, I wanted to comment on the issue of in writing, because I think the legislation actually contemplates that. It says that the complaint may be in writing, but there are recording requirements on the part of the employer or the person in charge of the institution. So that will help you to overcome that hurdle. But I think it's very important to record, because if it turns out to be a frivolous or vexatious claim, then as the employer haven't taken steps in furtherance, you could have exposed yourself to liability or a claim of defamation or something like that. So recording is absolutely important, but it doesn't have to be
the complainant per se.
The complainant. So your other question now, just break it up in parts for me, so to ensure that the first part of it.
No, we're talking about motives. We're talking about motives and intention.
All right.
So somebody, again, because this is a cultural shift, you have old people, and I'm not one of them, but you have old people who like to refer to, let's say, some of their female colleagues as darling and baby and honey, or give compliments which perhaps would have been okay in the 70s, but not so much in the 2020s. I just want to know your view or any comment you have on the relevance of the person's intention and their background, maybe even their culture and their age, in terms of determining whether sexual harassment has occurred.
Okay, so what would trigger a claim is a subjective assessment of an interaction. So as the complainant, I feel that based on your advance, the nature of it, I feel harassed. No, it's not for management or supervisor or whoever to determine, make that kind of assessment from the outset. There has to be some kind of investigation, because at the end of the day, what you really want is an objective assessment as to whether this is a reasonable cause for such a claim. So the genesis of the claim would be subjective, your subjective assessment. But ultimately, it's an objective assessment as to whether or not a reasonable person in those circumstances will feel that way. And what I'm encouraged by is the fact that when a claim, for instance, progresses to the tribunal is able to, I don't know if you want to.
When you say tribunal, we're talking about the sexual harassment tribunal?
The tribunal, correct.
Okay.
Is able to exercise somewhat, I would want to call it like case management powers, in that an assessment is made on paper. And even before it advances to, paneling and all of that, the tribunal can give feedback to say, based on the investigation and based on our assessment of this, the claim is not made out, and so we won't proceed. So to answer your question, it is both subjective and objective. And some of the considerations in terms of the nature of the advances is it persistent? If it's persistent conduct, then we can understand that how cumulatively you can come to an assessment that is not only harassment, but based on the conduct, it's of a sexual nature. However, an isolated single incident of a sexual advance can suffice if it is severe enough. And all of this is to be objectively decided.
Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Right. Anybody else wanting to comment on that? Especially in terms of how do we go about dealing with allegations which have no extrinsic proof. It's just one person's word against the other. Have anybody had to deal with something?
Yes.
Like that? Sharon, I know you want to jump in. Let me know.
Yes, I'd love to. Thank you so much, Gavin. So I agree totally with what Kadria just pointed out, the idea of just in search of objective assessment, just wanting to have objectivity. And this is one of the very, very critical points that are raised in the legislation, trying to make sure that the case is made for fairness and equity, so that if there is any doubt in anybody's mind about, the intent of the person and the whole idea of the interpretation, how is it that you interpret the actions of this person? You mentioned earlier that the emphasis is also placed on the person to whom the action is directed.
Yes.
Because the definition itself speaks definitively to that. Yes. How is it received by the person? Is it that the person welcomes it? Is it wanted? Is the person appreciating it? Are they participating in it and is fine with them? Once that is established, that the person does not wish to have it, and as was mentioned earlier, that you have a zero tolerance approach personally, and then in your space, the person in charge demonstrates that, then clearly you would want to know that objectivity has to be a very important part of that conversation, because you are going to interrogate everything using information. So you mentioned earlier the idea of making sure that it's written. We strongly encourage writing, simply because when you have written evidence, that is very helpful in terms of bringing your arguments, while you can detail all of what happened. If you have an affidavit, that's perfect, because then you have somebody who is like an advocate. And I love the idea of that. Did she say ambassador? What was it?
Ombudsman.
Ombudsman. I love that idea. I mean,
Ombudsperson.
Yeah, I prefer ombudsperson because it could be male or female. I think ombudsman is a little sexist as a term. So my preference would be ombudsperson. But if that's what you have in a Scotiabank, that's better than having nothing at all. So that advocate who can actually speak for you, lobby for you, and be there for you. Because in some cases, when a person experiences sexual harassment, it's traumatizing. The person sometimes is so aggrieved and transfixed, like, you know, what just happened? And sometimes just not able to speak up about it right away. So if you have somebody, a group of persons, you know, if you want to call it your tribe, or persons who have seen what had happened, experience it for themselves or not, but just conscious enough, having that awareness that they can actually assist you to come forward. That is something that's recommended in the legislation. You can have somebody speaking on your behalf. You can take that person with you as well when you're making the complaint, or just have that person to assist you to bear all of that and to make sure that all the information gets out without you missing any details, and making sure that you dot your I's, cross your T's. All the information is going to be important. I heard Kadra mention earlier about this sexual harassment tribunal. That's a very important part of this legislation, because that's the main adjudicating body. And that's where the discussions will take place in terms of what really happened, truly happened, and how it is that you're going to make that award. And based on what the legislation says, the only thing outside of that is that if the persons are not okay with what happened, what the award is at the end of the discussions and all of that hearing, then that person can take it to the Court of Appeal, Supreme Court. But outside of that, the emphasis is going to be placed on the tribunal. So we encourage persons to put it in writing as much as possible, get all your evidence. And if you have other episodes, it might not be the only one. Sometimes it's an isolated case, but sometimes it's a series of things that have happened. Sometimes that person, male or female, who is in the legislation described as a respondent, might have had a series of cases before. So if you talk to persons, for example, they can, you know, declare that, yes, it has happened to me before, but I didn't come forward because of fear of reprisal. You know, I fear that I might lose this job, lose the promotion, lose the prospect for promotion, getting ahead, and so on. And so if you can put everything together, that really helps. So when your case is solid and more effective, when you have evidence that is empirical, and you can actually stand on that and have persons verify and validate and cross-validate what it is you're saying.
All right, I want to talk a little bit more. Thank you so much for that. I want to talk a little bit more about the tribunal. Loy, I'm going to come in with you right now first, and then we're going to talk about the tribunal.
Right. So, right. No, I was just saying, one of the things we have to remember as employers and as HR persons is that we should take no action. I was, you know, when I went back through the legislation again, said take no action that adversely affects the opportunities, the terms, and the working conditions of the person, of the worker who has lodged a sexual complaint. You find that sometimes persons, in their eagerness to fix the problem, they make it worse. Mm-hmm. And so it is important that persons don't just rush to take an action, but they spend the time earlier to have the right policies and the right procedures in place so that they don't adversely affect the person. So I just wanted to tell you that other side, since Sharon was speaking today.
Thank you so much, Loy. I want to talk about the tribunal in particular, the Sexual Harassment Tribunal. I see a message from Mayo Warren asking for an update on the setup of the tribunal. I'm going to throw that to Sharon in a minute. But first, I want us to talk about the role of the Sexual Harassment Tribunal under the legislation. Because some people believe that the Sexual Harassment Tribunal is really not set up to be determining, to replace your own internal reporting and disciplinary processes. Whereas there is another view that, in fact, especially if you are a small business and you don't have an HR department, that the best and safest thing for you to do as that employer who has, in respect of a complaint made within your organization, is to send the complainant to the Sexual Harassment Tribunal and essentially say, we will abide by whatever decision the tribunal makes, but we are not going to take on the role of investigating and disciplining ourselves because there's too much risk associated with that. So I'm gonna ask again if Sharon and or Kadria, if you can just comment on what you see the role of the tribunal being, and do you think that the tribunal is really the party that's going to be hearing the vast majority of sexual harassment complaints going forward, based on this law?
Thank you, Gavin. So I think I have to do a little history lesson first.
Mm-hmm.
I hear the questions about you were saying something, Kadria?
No, Kadria soon come in.
Okay. So I hear you talking about the remit, relevance and remit of the tribunal. And I agree that for some persons, they might feel that why are we having a separate tribunal? Why don't we have it being a part of the IDT? And
sorry, Sharon, that's not the question I asked though, but that is a different issue, but that's not the issue which I'd asked a while ago. What I'd asked is why have the tribunal, the sexual harassment tribe, why should I as an employer do my own investigations and make a finding in relation to an allegation of sexual harassment when there is the tribunal who can do that same thing and they have greater resources than I have? That's really the question.
Okay. Fine. So that's because the law states that before you come to the tribunal, you should exhaust all internal remedies at the workplace level, if you're in a workplace. And you should make sure that all of the things that are mentioned in the legislation that you should have should be in place. So for example, if we start with the responsibility of the persons in charge, and it's very specific in the legislation that the persons in charge have that responsibility to bring to the attention of all the workers that sexual harassment is there's a zero tolerance approach to it. The person in charge has a responsibility to make sure that mechanisms are in place. Once they have a policy, if they don't have one, they create one. If they can't create a policy, then they seek help. The Bureau can assist, and they can also get help from other spaces. But if they don't have one, the idea is to create one, or you can use the legislation itself, the act itself. You can also create a statement that would allow you to say how it is that you intend to treat with matters of sexual harassment based on the legislation itself. I also am happy when I heard about that ombudsperson. There is a strong encouragement for in the workplace to have a committee, a body of persons, and it doesn't have to be a large committee. If you already have a grievance procedure, perfect. You can use that as your first point of reference. If you don't have one, you can create one. The law also recommends that you can have an officer assigned, and that could be called a welfare officer, or if you're not okay with the term welfare, you can call that officer a designated officer or some term that allows persons to know that this person is the point person, the focal point, and that person is going to be assisting the HR to deal with the matters. So when the matters come forward, you will know the steps that are involved. Once it is that the complaints are made, the HR team has that responsibility to make sure that the internal mechanisms are followed through properly. And that is one of the reasons why the encouragement is that it be done through the HR, and the HR has that responsibility. Because the idea is to try to solve it at the workplace level or at the institutional level as much as possible. If it can't be resolved, there's stalemate. Nobody's budging. You know, you come up against, let us say, both parties are just not agreeing on what is supposed to happen, or nobody's budging.
When you say both parties, who are the both parties? The complainant and
both parties will be the complainant and the respondent. The law refers to the person who brings forward the complaint as a complainant, and the person who is supposed to have carried out the action is referred to in the legislation as a respondent. So if both parties are not budging, you just can't get to a point where they can see reason and, for example, talk about it in such a way that the person who is a complainant feels that justice has been served and feels that they can come to an amicable agreement.
Kadria, you had wanted to comment as well?
Yes, Gavin. Just to know that there are what I would call two doors to accessing the tribunal. Door number one is a situation where in terms of the internal mechanism, a grievance or disciplinary procedure is in place in keeping with the labor relations code, because that's industrial relations best practice. So assuming that you have that in place and the dispute is not resolved, then it can be escalated to the tribunal. However, I think the other option, door number two, recognizes the reality of our situation where we have a lot of—
Can you describe what door number two is?
So I'm explaining now.
Okay.
A situation where you have like a small business and either the mechanism is not in place or the resources are not there to empanel and to, adjudicate on a matter, on a complaint. And so in that situation, the matter, the grievance will commence at the level of the tribunal. And I think both options are extremely relevant. The advantage is that, when you give persons an opportunity to ventilate within the business, as opposed to inviting the tribunal to adjudicate, at least you give persons the opportunity to perhaps repair a relationship, because sometimes things can be settled and you move on, as opposed to going to the tribunal. But the tribunal is definitely advantageous because therein you have resources available, because when a complaint is made, there's an authorized officer who will be assigned to investigate. And so, for instance, there's a worker who is concerned that there's no probity in terms of probably the size of the organization or just the, just the setup of it. They're thinking that their claim might be prejudiced. Then they will feel more comfortable than having the tribunal send in the resource persons to do that investigation, and then the claim can be made.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that enlightenment. So we said there are two different avenues, and you think that perhaps the second door, I wouldn't call it the back door, but the second door is really more applicable for institutions or for businesses, small businesses that may not have the resources or may not feel confident that they have the resources to be able to properly carry out the kind of investigation and disciplinary process that our labor relations laws would require of them. All right, I see a hand up, Sharon. I see your hand is back up. Sure, jump in.
Great. Thank you so much. I also believe that the door 2, as Hadley calls it, can also work very well for the landlord-tenant situation.
Yes.
So there's no HR to complain to. And so you would need to go directly to the tribunal. I like the fact that you mentioned the authorized officers, because those authorized officers are within the Bureau of Gender Affairs in a unit that we refer to as a Sexual Harassment Investigation Unit. And that unit has the remit of ensuring that the cases, if they are brought forward, whether they come to the tribunal and then sent to us for us to investigate, just take the case, or it is coming directly to the Bureau for us to take the information and prepare the report and accelerate that to the tribunal. That unit is that liaison between the complainant and the Sexual Harassment Tribunal.
Sure, agreed completely. All right, so we've been talking a lot about the process and the tribunal itself and the how. I want to talk a little bit more about the why. Why is it important for companies to get on board with terms of proactively addressing sexual harassment and complying with the law? Are there reputational aspects of it which we need to be considering as well? Belinda, see your hand is up. You were exactly the person I was hoping would put up her hand.
Yeah, you actually knocked on the door, because one of the things in listening to all the speakers and just looking at how it is that we not only reassess and reevaluate our current position, but making it more stronger. I thought about the fact, and when I spoke to our talent in preparing for this, one of the things she pointed out is the fact that all of our policies and practices and framework must support each other. So even with marketing being a part of making sure that we have a communication and internal communications policy, making sure that a framework is in place for how persons can actually communicate issues or angst and grievances, you have to also recognize the fact that if these things are not handled judiciously, expeditiously, timely, and timing is very important, these can have ramifications, long-term, short-term, and immediate for your brands. And then that is where now crisis communication comes into effect. You really don't want to go down that road. So a major part of our care that we take at Proven is to ensure that the practices that we have in place are ones that are along the line of preventative. what it is that you need to understand, that you need to do. And it all comes again from a simple document that we had even before all of this major construct, which was our code of conduct that says you have a duty of care to yourself, you have a duty of care to each other, and you have a duty of care to your organization and the people you serve. So pretty much in looking at it from that aspect, for me, if you fail to protect your reputation and your brand, the ramifications and implications can be way more devastating. And no matter of fact, if you consider yourself to be an employer of choice, this too can have impact for who you are actually going to be, welcoming into your doors.
Thank you so much. Loy, I want to know if you want to jump in on that, because I want to get a better idea from you of what you think the potential consequences can be for organizations that fail to address sexual harassment adequately, whether it's legally, whether it's reputationally, whether it's from a business perspective. Just grateful for your insight on that.
Gavin, we have something in Jamaica, and we say we want Jamaica to be the place of choice to live, work, raise families, and do business. It comes down to our own workplaces. If Jamaica is to be the place of choice to work, or individual organizations have to be the place of choice to work. If you are the kind of organization that you are known for tolerating this kind of toxic environment and poisonous environment, you're going to lose your top talent. Top talent will not be interested in coming to you at all. If somebody knows that if I come, why should I work for this firm when I'll become, there are predators there. That's how people will see it. People
predators, you said predators, right?
Predators. Okay. That's how person's going to say it. You can also be bankrupt in terms of money and reputation. And nobody wants to go to a firm where, if you go to that firm, it doesn't work. I'll give you a quick story. Many years ago, we bought a television from a certain place, and it would go bad every week. And I remember after a while, we realized that they gave us a bad TV. And every time we said to them, and I remember my brother saying, I'm a young lawyer and I'm ready to, and I just need to sue because it's clearly this is not working. They changed the TV, Gavin. We never had a problem since. I think it's up to us to now make sure that our workplaces are the places that people want to work, because people have choices. We think that people don't have choices, but if you look at our migration, that tells you that people have choices, right?
Yes.
People don't just migrate from a country, people migrate from jobs. And there's a saying that people don't leave workplaces, they leave employers. So that is part of it. I also looked at the law, and the law said, if you refuse to comply, you could be fined up to $1 million. You're the lawyer here. $1 million, 12 months at His Majesty's pleasure. I don't think anybody wants to be, that to say that they neglected that. You have to compensate the complainant for loss and damage as well. The investigators can come and take your documents. Do you want them to take your documents? The only documents they can't take are the ones that are protected by legal professional privilege. So it's very important that organizations set their systems in place. Otherwise, they might find they have no business at all. That's what it comes down to. It comes down to
organization. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I say that's what it comes down to. No business at all.
So setting their house in order. One of the things which needs to be done within 12 months of the passage of the law, which was essentially July 2023. So by July 2024, every business, every employer, I should say, needs to have a sexual harassment policy. In the chat, Loy was and Tashna were very generous in giving links to the law, and the policy document can be found there. It's not something, unfortunately, that you can just put your business's name in the square brackets and press print. There are still sections there which need to be completed to include what your organization has, whether it's an ombudsman or ombudsperson, or if it has a committee, or the complaints are going to go to an authorized person to deal with it, or a special person to deal with it. You still are going to have to create your own processes and insert it in the document, and circulate it. Another part of the law is that you're supposed to bring this to the attention of not only your workers, but everybody who is part of that, or who has access to that policy, or who has rights under that policy. And that would include, for instance, job applicants. It would include, as Kadria said, suppliers, contractors, even your clients. And in the video that we saw at the start of this presentation, it appeared as if the person who was the harasser wasn't even a member of staff. It was a client who was bringing in $2 million worth of business there. So we understand now that by extending this law to clients as well, to the people who support and are the lifeblood of your business, it does require some great thought and, in fact, perhaps a culture change. This concept of the customer is always right doesn't necessarily mean that the customer has rights to disrespect and denigrate your staff members. You gave a story a while ago. One of the stories that I often think about is this restaurant called Hooters. I don't know if anybody here has heard of Hooters. I certainly have never been there myself. But that whole business model is, in many respects, built upon objectifying women. And I certainly don't think that that kind of business model, I know we're bringing in all these foreign chains. I really don't think that Hooters will be coming to Jamaica now that we have this sexual harassment law in place, which is meant to protect that type from that type of objectification and discrimination. But as I say that, at the same time, there's a common feeling out in the public that really what this sexual harassment law is in Jamaica is us importing foreign principles and foreign standards into Jamaica and trying to change our Jamaican culture and becoming indoctrinated with foreigners and Me Too and things that are happening overseas. Anybody want to have a comment on whether they agree or disagree, or have even heard of that kind of view or response to the law coming into force?
All right, so I can understand why the average Jamaican will be of that view. And one of the things I want to say in terms of the long-term impacts of the legislation is that it's intended to bring about behavior modification, because it's felt that the culture that we have we're so steeped in and that we have so accepted over the years is one that's based in sometimes perceptions of misogyny, where men objectify women. And here it is that the women of back in the day are different from the women of today, because you can decide, you're in a position to decide what you're gonna accept. And if you feel that you have a right to your dignity, and it's a matter of dignity, because that's what sexual harassment does. It strips you of your dignity, and human dignity is a fundamental right. So it's bringing those concerns front and center. So before now, it was okay to comment on, a woman's physique and just without thinking how this will impact her. But she has a right to enjoy her physique without you undressing her in your mind. So that's pretty much what the legislation is trying to achieve in the long run: behavior modification and just mutual respect.
I love that response. One of the other things that I hear often...
Sorry, Gavin, my hand was up for a while.
Sorry. Please go ahead.
I see you missed it. Okay, I wanted quickly...
Oh, sorry, it's Sharon. Sorry, I thought it was Maya. I see your hand as well, Maya. I'm going to take a comment right after Sharon.
Right. Okay, so thanks for that. So I saw when I wanted to make a quick comment about the reputation and just protecting the brand based on the fact that this is the business case we're trying to make here. and to say that the legislation itself is worthwhile pursuing. And we would endorse the fact that so many persons have recognized the importance of creating their own legislation, their own policy to match the legislation, and to make sure that it works within the space. And we also wanted to say that in terms of just preventing publicity that is negative, the whole idea of just making sure that you protect your brand and your company. If you are compliant with the legislation itself and what is involved in the legislation, then it means that you would be protecting your people in the space, and you'll be making sure that you have a safe space that is respectful, and you'll have employee satisfaction. I heard the culture piece that was mentioned by Kadria, and I quite agree. You'd want to make sure that the culture in your environment, whichever space you're in, whether it's a public sector or private sector, community-based, wherever the space is that you have workers, that persons understand the importance of just being safe. Persons understand how important it is for the person in charge to create that enabling environment, and each person understands how important it is to validate each other and to make sure that you look out for each other in a space that allows you to be more productive and enhance your performance, not to mention the morale and the camaraderie. So there are so many benefits that you can have out of just creating that space and just having compliance with the legislation.
Thank you so much, Sharon. Maya?
Yes, I just really want to echo so much of what Sharon and Kadria both said, because I think we have a reason to do it. The business has a reason to do it, to protect reputational risk, obviously, brand. You want to have that perception. And one of our guiding principles is actually to follow the law wherever we do business. So it is the law, so we're going to follow the law. But it is bigger than that. You want engaged employees. You want staff members who feel confident and safe in their environment and free to be their best selves. And that would then lead to better performance, which then leads to everybody happy. It all goes together. So I just think that it's really key. And I wanted to just mention something about our culture and that question you raised. And remember, this is all about consent, right? I will still consent to some physical touch. That's me personally. But somebody else might not be comfortable. And we want that person to feel that you're not forced. Just because you're in Jamaica, in the Caribbean, and we're touchy-feely and people want to hug, doesn't mean that you have to be compelled and feel uncomfortable to be in that situation because of where you are. We're individuals. We have different, feelings about these things. So, when I see Gavin come over, I'm going to give Gavin a hug. But that is me consenting, right? It might not be the same for somebody else. So I just think, we need to frame it in that sense. We're not trying to take away our warm Caribbean culture that is still there, but we have to also acknowledge the fact that we live in an environment where there are times where it's not consensual and it is uncomfortable and it is downright unlawful, and we need to ensure that persons are protected and have the right frameworks and controls and procedures in place to address it.
Another thing I want to add to Gavin, and Maya is quite correct, it comes back down to consent, and is the fact that at Proven, one of the things that we were taught as seniors to practice is mindfulness, and we should drill that down to our teams. So, I too am a touchy person. So when I see you, I'm going to run, come and hug you and kiss you and stuff. But yeah, so right now, with the mindfulness exercise that we had to undergo and to also drill down and hone in, you become a lot more aware. So before you do that, you literally stop and you ask the person, geez, I really want to hug you. Can I hug you? And, you get the consent to do so. So it's not taking away or saying that the warmness that we should have as individuals will be taken away, but it's just that what you do may not be acceptable to someone else. So this whole mindfulness practice comes back down to just being present at the state, because it could be that somebody was going through something at a point in time, or you don't know what nuances they're actually undergoing. So, you don't tend to breach their privacy, their whole personal space. Because if you're one of the practices that we did too is that if you're introducing yourself to someone and you step to them and they step back, you shouldn't step forward. You should really hold your ground, because it simply means that the person is saying, you are
In your
actually
space.
in my space.
Mhm.
So, you know, that kind of thing. So it's going to take a little while because habits are very hard to change. But the fact of the matter is that it's something that needs to be done. But we would have already started the process. So with our whole organization on health and wellness, it is important for us to keep on reinforcing what is necessary, what is needed, what is important for us to enjoy a real communicable, awesome workspace.
Gavin, part of how we do that behavior modification that these ladies have been talking about is that we have to carry to the schools. You know, I wouldn't be in HR if I didn't think about our HR persons in schools or children. We need to start the awareness training there so that they are aware, you know. A child, I think in some spaces overseas, I remember reading about a 5-year-old child who was charged with harassment because he hugged his classmate, you know, and the poor child was like, what? I don't understand what happened here. So I think it's also important that part of how we do the modification, you know, part of how we incentivize, we also make sure that we let our children know that what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, so that they know if they are harassed, because sometimes some of the harassment and some of the issues happen at that level in some of the institutions, as the law talks about, in, you know, and at some of the schools and that kind of thing, and some of the homes. Because a child, you know, I remember somebody saying to me, I was raped and I didn't know I was raped. I didn't understand that what rape was. I just thought this was normal behavior. So it is important for us to start the conversation at a younger age as well, so that when they come in the workplace, they are already on track and aware of what is going on. And I think there are comments in the chat for you to respond.
Yeah, thank you, Lloyd. I see the questions from Candice and from Gracie, and I'm going to come to them momentarily. I just wanted to share my own perspective when I give some of these workshops on sexual harassment. You know, Kadria said something about, you know, being able to enjoy your body in freedom without being harassed. And one of the comments which I often get when I do my sexual harassment workshops is that women in particular have a responsibility, they say, to not dress or conduct themselves in a way that attracts unnecessary or unwanted male attention, because you can't complain about being undressed by somebody's eyes if you are dressing in a particular way that provokes that type of response from a man. I want to know if anybody has any thoughts or comments on the so-called responsibility that victims of sexual harassment have in terms of how they behave or how they dress.
Are we saying that the males don't have responsibilities to
I
keep
don't think that's what
themselves
they
to
were saying. I
themselves?
don't know that that's what was being said. But I welcome all the comments and reactions.
Right. So I was thinking that, you know, that's kind of like gaslighting, and it's thought patterns such as that which have brought us here, where we need to actually legislate how it is that we interact with each other. Because the fact that I think basically what is being required of our men is that they are to be more conscious of how it is that, you know, they interact with women, and that they do not have any special privilege to a woman in terms of, yes, you can appreciate it from a distance because, you know, women are appreciable. But it's what you do with that, you understand? And the fact that it will impose on me in such a way that it becomes a problem. You understand? So instead of me smiling to make you feel comfortable, sexual harassment, the policy and the setup and the legislation is allowing us as women to express how we truly feel and to just draw a line in the sand as to what it is that we're prepared to tolerate. It's balanced. So I know there are men too who can be victims of sexual harassment, but it's just about ensuring that we respect each other, we understand boundaries, and that there's a level of accountability of self, and not blame someone for your reaction, because the problem is your reaction, not the woman's sexiness.
Okay. Any other views on that? I mean, some people will say that, you know, you didn't want attention from person A, you wanted from person B. So when person A give you the attention, it's unwanted, but person B, it's fine. But you know, anybody, I mean,
Oh, absolutely, Gavin. I just want to quickly say here that
sure.
I think it you know, the whole idea of good governance is very important in this space, because good governance not only creates a responsibility for the organization, it also creates a very personal responsibility for the persons. So you must take individual responsibility. And I think as much as persons will say, but you know, this person was looking very half naked or, you know, very appealing. The point is this: we all have that moral responsibility to understand that each person has rights. And the minute we get to that point where we accept that this person looking a particular way does not give me the right to grow this person, or to reach out and grab this person, or to make sexually suggestive jokes, or to insist that this person should be my person, or that I should go to lunch with you, go to bed with you, and so on. The fact that this person dressed a particular way does not mean that this is going to give you an invitation to sexually harass a person. So I think it is working both ways.
Okay.
Whether you're a male or female, both parties have that responsibility, because the same for men. You have some women who harass men. Sometimes the cases are less, but you have women who also harass women. And you have men who harass men. We've had the cases coming forward. And so I think each person has to understand the idea of my particular responsibility is very important. You know, this expression I heard some time ago, and I like it. It talks about the what is it? I don't remember it now. It's talking about the value of just respecting the personhood and the property and possession. And I have the right of my personhood, the right of my possessions, everything I own, including what's on my body and how I was designed, and my possessions, whatever I own, my property, my intellectual property, everything that I have been endowed with. I should have that right to use it and not worry that you're going to be seeing it as something that you think you should have. And if I don't accede to your request, I'm not in favor of what you're asking and your overture, that you're going to come across, that you're going to put something that caused me to feel I'm going to not get my promotion, I'm not going to get the increase, I'm not going to move forward. No one should blackmail anyone or cause anyone to feel as if I don't accede to that request, it's going to be to my detriment. I think persons should just understand. And it's not impossible. It might take a longer time for some persons, but I think if persons start practicing self-awareness, I like the idea of the mindfulness that was mentioned. I think that was so critical. If we're all mindful about each other and just respect each other's space. I remember when we were doing a discussion with one of those entities that were creating their own legislation, we talked about using sex-fair language and using language that persons understand.
Using what language?
Sex-fair language. Sex-fair language meaning when you use a language, it tells you that you are not accusing anyone of anything specific, and you're not victimizing anyone, and you're not branding anyone. So if it is that you say person, for example, if you say ombudsperson, then it means it could be a position held by a male or a female. Sometimes when we use a language, it sounds like you are only looking for a male. So if you say the chairman, then automatically persons assume that it has to be a male to fill that chair. While if you say chairperson, and that is why in the legislation itself, it speaks to the tribunal having a chairperson and deputy chairpersons, meaning you can have male filling those spaces as well as females filling those spaces. And finally, to say language that allows you to know. So I heard somebody say, I think it was Belinda, if you step forward to somebody and the person steps back, then that's an idea that the person perhaps doesn't want you too close to them. And I remember when we did that legislation discussion with one of those entities, one of the persons there came up with this idea of saying, you're in my bubble, meaning you're too close to me, so you could just step back. We're a touchy-feely generation, and a lot of persons in Jamaica,
after COVID,
and some persons will admit, yes, they are very touchy-feely. So if you say to this person, you're in my bubble, that means the person is too close. So step back, don't embrace me, I am not comfortable. So you can develop that language also in your policy statement or in your policy on the workplace, and have that discussion with persons so they are clear on what it is that they're comfortable with. Because at the end of the day, your policy statement or your policy that you're going to develop is going to be protecting the persons in your space, and you want persons to own it and to be a part of it. So allow them to give language and to share language and expressions that are comfortable for persons and that are clear, no ambiguity. So persons know exactly what is said. That's going to be very helpful in this space.
All right, well, as you mentioned, the Sexual Harassment Tribunal, I have a question in the chat that asks, where is it physically located? Is there a contact number for the tribunal that could be shared in the forum? I don't think we have one yet, do we, Sharon?
Not yet. Thank you for that. No, we're in the process of, and very soon the minister will name the tribunal based on what the law says. Once it is out, once it is official, then the name should be gazetted. So it can't be a secret. The process is in train. We are going very far, but there is a part that speaks to fit and proper. And that states that no person should be appointed to the tribunal unless they have satisfied the fit and proper eligibility criteria. And that's the place where we are now, where persons are sorting out that with the Ministry of National Security. We have done most of the other parts of it. And physically, it's going to be within the ministry, meaning the sessions, just like you have the IDT meeting, the sessions will be held within the ministry. We will have a space that will be designated for the meetings, and that will be announced as well when the minister announces the composition of the tribunal and how it is that we will have how the meetings will take place. She will announce all of that very soon. We're in the process of doing that.
Okay. Gracian had asked a question as, can we discuss internal penalties for different offenses? In the video, the supervisor got a written warning and the manager was asked, what would he have done differently? The law mentions fines for different offenses under the Act. Is it recommended we stick to that, or can the company add this to their usual disciplinary schedule? I'm going to answer that myself. I'm going to take the liberty of answering that. As a company, as an employer, you have the right to determine the severity of the offenses, including of sexual harassment. A lot of the law does speak about zero tolerance, which doesn't necessarily mean that you must terminate somebody for a first offense. It means that you should be taking disciplinary action for every occasion, which could be a suspension, it could be something else. I generally don't recommend to my clients that they do anything less serious than a suspension for a proven case of sexual harassment, because then you could be undermining the severity of the offense. If you say that you need to have 3 instances of sexual harassment before someone can be dismissed, that really does send the wrong message, I think, to your team. I will say that the internal penalties for the offenses, again, is something which the law does not prescribe. It just says that you need to take appropriate action. And the Sexual Harassment Tribunal itself can do things such as order the harasser to give an apology to the person that they have harassed, or to take some kind of course to or counseling or training, or attend certain these kind of sessions. So there's a lot of flexibility on how to deal with it, but these aren't offenses such as you would call legal offenses or sanctions under the law. There's a question that came before about culture and balancing affirming human dignity with flashing or lighters for the song or dancehall lyrics, Gal for Beg. And I was going to expand it because I don't want to make this conversation about dancehall specifically. But part of our culture or music can be very sexual, whether it's dancehall, whether it's R&B, whether it's soca music. A lot of it is very sexual in nature. And the question I think I understand is, how do we balance a culture and in all elements of our culture, which include some very sexualized elements, with the culture change that we're expecting this law to bring about in terms of not objectifying anybody, not commenting on people's physical appearance, as these songs all suggest that you should do or is okay to do. Any thoughts on that balance? And also blended into that is, when do you think we would start seeing this culture change coming about from this law? Is it something that we should expect to see maybe next year or by 2030 when we're Vision 2030? Any comments from anyone?
I think we can expect change in our workplaces immediately. or at least in the next 12 months when they implement their policies, because that's a very that's a captive audience. And if I'm gonna say to you, in order for you to keep your job, you have to behave like this, then more than likely you're gonna comply. But in terms of entertainment and, you know, the lewdness of the lyrics and all of that, we just have to be sensible about it, because there is a space for all of that still. You understand? It's just music, and different people appreciate and react to different things. It's just that cannot translate to you feeling entitled to interact with someone a certain way. But you enjoying your music and putting up your lighter when you hear a song and all these things, nobody's gonna outlaw that. But when in turn you're going to model what is in the song in terms of your interaction with someone, then therein lies the problem.
It's funny you say that, Kadria, because I think part of the act speaks about singing sexually suggestive songs in the workplace. So I think what we're saying is that the things that you can flash up your lighter to in a particular environment might not be the same things that you can do and sing and replicate within the workplace. And of course, this seminar is speaking about sexual harassment in the workplace. We haven't even got onto the topic of sexual harassment in public, the cat calling out on the streets and all those kind of things, which this law really doesn't even deal with at all. But yes, I certainly take that point. I think Kadria is very optimistic that our culture will start to change in 1 year. I like how that's put. I have another question here from...
Sorry, Gabby, may I just say something quickly on that?
Sure.
Thank you. I think I agree with Kadria about the timing, and I'm very optimistic that it's not going to be an overnight fix. If we took so long to get here, and this is where we are in 2023, then I believe that it's going to be a process that is going to happen, and persons have to get to that place where they agree that there is an issue and try to fix it. I think a lot of awareness raising will have to take place. We have already started that. We've been doing that for years, but some persons listen, but they might not necessarily comply. And so the compliance is going to be a big issue, and just valuing what is required. So if you're in a space and you are working with persons, then you have to respect those persons. If you're in a public space, private space, whatever it is, wherever you are, a faith-based, community-based, whatever, you have to respect persons. And I think for us as a larger group, in terms of just Jamaicans, persons all have to get to that place where we value each other, and where we understand that I have a personal responsibility to value me just as I would value somebody else. And perhaps the same way I would want to be treated and how I want to be respected, I would want to expect that from other persons. So once the compliance kicks in, we expect that persons in the workplace and in other spaces should treat each other better. But I don't think it's going to be an overnight fix. I think it's going to be a long haul. We're in it for the long haul, and it's going to take a longer time. But I think based on the fact that the legislation states that 1 year from July 3, we should have in the workplace a little more compliance. I think for the outside space, the public sector, the wider public,
yes.
And just persons in general and other spaces, it might not kick in instantly. But I do believe that there is hope, because prior to now, we've also had surveys, and I've heard people say they're glad that this is here, because they had been experiencing sexual harassment for a while and nothing was in place. And so with something in place, that means somebody will think twice about making a sexual advance, because now there's something in place with penalties. You mentioned the tribunal just now, and the law is very clear that, for example, offenses under the Act in Section 39 speaks to the fact that if a person appears before the tribunal as a witness, and in the process of speaking to the tribunal, they will give, or should, if they give false or misleading statements, then they commit an offense, and that offense will allow the tribunal to rule that they can pay a fine, liable to pay a fine not exceeding $1 million, or a term of imprisonment not exceeding 12 months or a year. And it continues
that wouldn't be the tribunal that makes that ruling, but yes, definitely there are penalties there for those offenses which the court could impose. Thank you so much.
This came straight from the Act, Gavin. In terms of it's going to be in the court itself, but what I'm saying, the ruling tribunal will make that ruling based on what happens when the hearing is taking place.
All right, so thank you very much, Sharon Coburn Robinson, Principal Director of the Gender Affairs Bureau of the Ministry of Culture, Gender, Entertainment, and Sport. Our other panelists, of course, have included Loy Walters, the President of the Human Resource Management Association of Jamaica. We've been speaking also with Maya Wilson, who is the Group Senior Legal Counsel and Corporate Secretary at Scotiabank Limited. We've had Belinda Williams, our Assistant Vice President of Proven Management Limited and the Chief Marketing Officer. And we've also had, of course, Kadria Folks, Attorney at Law and Employment Law Specialist Practitioner. And I have been your moderator. My name is Gavin Goff, and I am an attorney at law. We're moving into the wrap-up section now. I just want to make sure that we thank our main sponsor, that's the JMMB Group, for facilitating us to make sure we've had this very engaging and informative session. I think you'd all agree. And thank you so much, of course, to our panelists. I know that there are a couple other questions and comments in the chat. I'm going to try and see as best as we can if we can respond to those in the chat itself, because where we are right now, I think we've come almost to the end of our session. I want to thank you all for being here and for listening and being an interactive and participative audience. And now I will just turn it over for our vote of thanks.
Good day to everyone. How are you? I hope you're all doing wonderful today. My name is Georgette Bolton-Smith, and I'm the Policy Research and Programs Manager here at the PSOJ. So on behalf of the PSOJ and the Gender and Disabilities Affairs Committee, I want to extend my heartfelt gratitude to each and every one of you for your attendance and active participation and the invaluable contributions in making this critical and relevant forum on sexual harassment a wonderful success. The webinar has certainly improved our awareness and interpretation of the subject matter of sexual harassment, and that is really what is needed in today's society. Thank you to the chair of the Gender and Disability Affairs Committee, Renee Morrison, for all the wonderful work that was put in and for taking the necessary steps to enhance the development of the private sector by promoting a culture of zero tolerance towards sexual harassment. And through the dissemination of this critical information, we will certainly be able to do that. Also, a special thank you to our esteemed moderator, Mr. Gavin Goff, and all the wonderful panelists who share their insights, experiences, and expertise on the subject matter. Your thoughts and knowledge have certainly enriched our understanding and propelled the dialogue forward, encouraging us to take meaningful action to prevent and combat sexual harassment. As Sharon indicated, partnership is an important part of building a zero tolerance culture towards sexual harassment. And the PSOJ is indeed proud to partner with all of you today. We would also like to extend a special thank you to our sponsor, JMMB, for making this possible and for their generous support and contribution, and also to the PSOJ team. Thank you for all the hard work and dedication and the seamless coordination towards the planning phase and for executing this successful event. Last but not least, let us not forget our viewers and our participants. Thank you very much for logging on and for making this webinar a success. Let us use the knowledge we have gained today and let it permeate our lives and create a workplace culture where everyone is treated with dignity, respect, and equality. So on behalf of the PSOJ, thank you for being a part of this forum and have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.